Grüß Gott and good afternoon to all of you from Munich. It's a great pleasure to see all of you. We are trying also Friday afternoon, not only Monday afternoon, to see if the audience will be with us. It's a great pleasure to have you here. And just a few words on why I'm here in Munich. Today here in Munich, the covered bond community is celebrating the 125th anniversary of an important issuer in the covered bond landscape, Münchner Hypothekenbank, a pioneer on the ESG landscape, who dare to change the mentality of the entire bank for an ESG mentality, and successfully, very much rooted in the local activities in Bayer, in Munich, Münchner Hypothekenbank was able to tap international capital markets and change the mentality of capital markets by producing ESG covered bonds and arriving to the market with a new culture. This is also the success of our initiative, because we have transformed a very traditional community, the covered bond community, the most important and most traditional community in Europe, in a very innovative community. We are trying to change the market culture and implement an ESG culture in capital markets. Today, with me, I have a very distinguished list of panelists who will show from the different angles of the market how the market is changing, and more has to come. Allow me to make some personal consideration on where we are today. I had the pleasure to work for this company for 15 years. Maybe I bring bad luck, but I have seen 3 horrendous crises in my career. 3 shocks that have changed the capital markets, have changed our society, and probably also our life. The first crisis that I've seen was in 2008, actually 2007, when the covered bond market, the mortgage market, has been shocked by what was at that time the most dramatic global crisis that we had seen. That was a dramatic moment. We have learned how to react to crisis, and the most important crisis management tool that Europe had available at that time, the covered bonds, the Pfandbriefe, the Obbligazione Foncière, the Obbligazione Bancaria Garantita, the Cedulas Hipotecaria, have been transformed in a global European asset class. The covered bond community and the ECBC has helped in managing the crisis by making the covered bond market a common entity, and altogether we have built the covered bond label, which was the step number 0 of the covered bond directive, which will be implemented finally in July, the 8th of July of this year. That was a lesson that we have learned, and we have learned how to work together and how to change the mentality of investors, issuers, and retail banks. Probably in our cover pools, as I always said, we don't have asset. We have dreams of families who want to build a better future for their kids. And we have millions of those dreams that have to be taken care of. Now we have to change our market again towards an ESG mentality and make the dreams of these families greener and more sustainable for the future. The second crisis that I've seen in my career has been the pandemic crisis. And also in that case, the covered bond community was able, together with the mortgage community, to propose solutions, to arrive and to support the fiscal effort of the countries in Europe to produce solutions avoiding a major shock on the real economy. Those 2 crises were very different, and the channel of transmissions to financial markets and real economy were completely different. But by working together, we fix it, and we have been able every single time to come back to normality quicker and stronger. Now we are in front of a 3rd crisis, which is very dramatic. Probably is not yet a global crisis, but the risk that this will change our world is there, is in front of our eyes. We cannot be naive. We have to be very attentive. We have to continue to work together, put at the center the dialogue of our community to overcome together the difficulties that we have. That's the call that we have, and that's the spirit of the Bauhaus. We have to work together, because probably all the nice discussion we had in the past months about taxonomy, about green, will be different. Will be different after the 24th of February. We have to make sure that covered bonds, mortgages, will continue to act as a catalyst for a greener economy. We can do it I'm pretty sure if we continue to work together, we can do a lot and we can change this market. We can secure the dreams of millions of families in Europe. We can make Europe stronger. So what we need more covered bonds, we need more green bonds, we need more Europe. Maybe we need to work all together. That's what we wanted to give as a sign of support to the people that are suffering today. And we are here to bring solution and to condemn strongly any aggression. And the dialogue is the only way to fix international tensions. And we as a community, we want to work for bringing solution on the table. With this, Richard, I give you the floor. I would like to thank the panelists for being with us. And I let you, Richard, present the panelists that we have today. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Luca. I can only agree with you in everything you say. It's an important call to arms for what we're doing here in this whole Bauhaus initiative, and a reminder of the importance of it. Yes, as Luca said, it's Friday afternoon. Good Friday afternoon, everybody. We do like to have feedback on when we do make changes, feedback on the format, on the timing, on the content. Please let us know what you think about it. I think one implication of Friday afternoon is that our time discipline is even more important. We have a strict 2 hours. And whatever you're doing this evening, whether it's catching a train, picking up the kids from school, or just having a pint, we are all that stands between you and the start of your weekend. So we are going to be very strict about sticking to our 2 hours. So over the course of the Bauhaus events, we've spoken a lot about the taxonomy. Naturally, it's very important, but it's also very, very complicated. Piet Hein Schram from the Dutch Mortgage Hub, Dutch Energy Efficient Mortgage Hub, which I presented here before, has been going through the taxonomy line by line, footnote by footnote, so that you don't have to. And our final presentation today is going to be his findings. Please ask him all of your questions about Chapter 7 of the taxonomy. Before that, we're going to be taking a little bit look at the data. We know how important data is. We've spent a lot of time thinking about data. NAV Energy Solutions has come up with some very neat ways to measure energy efficiency, and perhaps more importantly, apply that logic. And their CEO, Barry Linham, is going to be presenting on the work that they're doing. Before that, it's going to be a great pleasure to introduce an old friend, Patrick Seifert from Landesbank Baden-Württemberg. Patrick's going to be telling us a little bit about funding energy efficiency mortgages via the green bond market. I think specific interest in green covered bonds. If you're not familiar with that sector, it's been a huge success story with a huge amount of distance still to run. And LBBW has been a leading light in that sector. But our first presentation today, we're going to turn to Mira Lamriben of the EBA. We've spoken a lot about the role of our rule makers, of European Commission and the various initiatives. But in these events so far, we haven't spoken so much about the people who have to apply them. Specifically, in this case, the people who have to apply them to the supervision of banks. I've heard somebody ask me a couple of weeks ago whether the EBA is doing anything in the green space. And I think, without stealing your thunder, Mira, I think it's safe to say everything you do is impacted by the realities of climate change and the necessities of making sure that banks are adapting to it and are encouraging appropriate behaviour. It touches, I think, everything that you do. So, Mira, very apt that we start with you. If you could perhaps introduce, first of all, the EBA, for those who aren't so familiar with the work, with your work, and if you could please talk through how you integrate the green considerations into your work. Please, Mira.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me just first of all share my screen.
We can see it.
Okay. Yes, can you see it properly?
We can see it properly. We can see the next slide as well. Yep, that's perfect.
Well, because I think I have an issue here. I can't see it. Let me just, sorry for it. Let me just restart it. Is it okay, Richard, now?
It looks fine, yes.
Okay, perfect.
But we can see it perfectly clear.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much, Richard, for this introduction. So, and also thank you very much to the EMF-ECBC for inviting me to present the EBA work on ESG. I mean, as mentioned by Luca earlier, I mean, the EU policy agenda on sustainable finance has been expanding very quickly and significantly in only a few years. And I mean, there have been a lot of private and public initiatives going on. And I think that ESG is one of the most prolific items I think that we have seen developing recently. And in this context, I mean, as you all know, this has created a huge challenges and impact for the industry. First of all, because as you know, I mean, the industry has to start implementing some of these rules already on a best effort basis. They have to digest all this new upcoming ESG regulatory framework. And they also need to start to show already adaptability and forward thinking in an environment which is unstable and still evolving a lot. But the EU policy agenda on sustainable finance has also created a large challenging and is also having a large implication for the EU supervisors and regulators for two main reasons. The first one is that, as explicitly mentioned in the EU Commission Action Plan on Sustainable Finance, the ESAs, so the European supervisory agencies, including the EBA, the ESMA, and EIOPA, are explicitly required to support the Commission in implementing its sustainable finance strategy. So this has resulted in a number of new mandates and tasks that has been delegated to the ESAs. So I will talk about them in the presentation. But this has also created a lot of challenges because beyond this task and the technical advice that has been sent to the ESAs, and the EBA also in this context have to already reflect how ESG consideration should be integrated more broadly into its overall supervisory and regulatory framework. And this is a very complex and challenging work to be carried on. And we know, obviously, the pressure from the policy side, but also from the industry to have a kind of already clear view and direction of the EBA in this regard. So for the presentation today, I would like to provide you with an overview of, what is the EBA plan to integrate ESG consideration into the banking supervision and the EU banking regulation. I would like to give you a sense of the global direction of the work, of the priorities. I also would like to share with you the challenges that we are facing, and also give you an idea of what is our planning, but also having in mind that ESG is a work that is, as I say, evolving and stable, and which is also highly interdependent of the work which is also going on within other public fora, but which is also depending of the progress made by the industry in this regard. But before entering into or digging into the ESG topic, as you said, Richard, I would like to start with some introductory remark on what is the EBA, what is its main missions and objective, because I can guess that for some of you who are not necessarily very familiar with the banking architecture, I mean, this may look a little bit complex. So starting very basically, the EBA is an independent EU agency which has been established in 2011. It has taken its task from the Committee of European Banking Supervisors, which was itself created after the crisis. I mean, that was mentioned by Luca, by the great financial crisis of 2018 and 17, where we basically realized that indeed we need more Europe, we need more integration, we need more harmonization. So the main mission of the EBA is to build a single supervisory and regulatory framework that will be applicable to the entire EU banking sector, so to the EU 27 member states. This is meant to ensure that we have a single market that is efficient, transparent, and stable, and which is also beneficial not only to the EU business industry, but also to customer and more broadly to the EU economy. So there we are basically, we've been mandated with basically 4 tasks. The first one is to develop an European single rule book. So this is meant to ensure harmonization and level playing field in the EU banking rules that are applicable to EU credit institutions and investment firms. Second mission is to promote supervisory convergence and also cooperation between cross-border groups. This is here meant to ensure that we have a consistent implementation of the single rule book. Third mission is to assess the risk and vulnerabilities within the EU banking sectors. So here we regularly publish a risk analysis report, and every 2 years we also perform a stress test exercise. Fourth, we have also a mission to enhance consumer protection, to ensure that especially retail businesses have access to a very transparent and simple banking product and services. And then there's also multiple of other tasks, just to mention that we do also cross-border mediation, that we in the area of legal, we deal with breach of union laws, and so, and obviously also we do a specific technical advisory to the European Commission and Parliament. To perform this task, DBA, we can produce regulatory and non-regulatory documents, which include, for instance, binding technical standards, but also opinion, recommendations, reports, and so on. So in this slide, you can see that DBA is a bit at the center of the EU architecture of banking supervision and regulation. So as I said, DBA is in charge of developing the EU single rule book. So basically the Level 3 regulation that is applicable to banking, credit institution and investment firms. DBA work hand in hand with what we call the banking union, which is applicable only to the member state of the Eurozone area. Banking union is having 2 legs, the SSM that you may know very well, that is dealing which is in charge of supervision, and which is led by ECB. And the second leg is the single resolution mechanism that is within the hand of the SRB. But DB is also a kind of international, a fora for members that are not within the Eurozone, but who are also subject to the European Single Rule Book. And we also cooperate with countries that are not in the EU, such as Norway, for instance, or Iceland. And here also as well, we're trying to ensure as much as possible supervisory coverage with these countries as well. So now going to things that are a little bit more specific. So, in this global context, for 2022, the EBA has set several priorities. And as you can see on the screen, there are 5 main priorities that has been defined this year, which is a bit of a continuation of what we had last year, but with new update and specific focus. As always, the key, the core of the work of DBA is really about monitoring and updating the prudential framework. We also still have the stress test as a core mission of DBA. And so the last stress test that we have was last year. So this year, the objective is really to review the methodology and to straighten it. The third priority is really about also data. I think for everyone, data is now we really are realizing that we need more accessibility, more transparency, more efficiency in the way we process them, collect them, and reuse them. Fourth priority is about digital finance. which is also an area as ESG, which has been growing a lot, and where there's a lot of work that needs to be delivered ahead of us. And finally, there's also a significant amount of work going on in DBA in the area of anti-money laundering. But as you could see in these slides, there are two main horizontal objectives that has been defined this year. The first one is about COVID, so integrating, the COVID dimension into the supervision, regulation, and trying to monitor this risk for banks and see the extent to which regulation will need to be adapted. And the second one, which is of an interest for us today, is ESG. So ESG has been defined as a key horizontal priority for DBA. The focus here is really to embed ESG definition and risk aspects within the regulation, the supervision practices, and credit institution risk management. In this regard, we have actually created last year a new unit, which we did not have before, which is a ESG risk unit, which is has gathered several experts from different areas of the EBA, and which is in charge of leading the ESG work for the EBA, but also coordinating all the ESG work within the EBA, because as you will see, this is something which is covering mostly all ESG is really something that will be covering most of the different areas that the EBA is dealing with. The work of the EBA is basically on ESG is basically building up on the work that has been done on EU Taxonomy and on the progress that has been made on disclosure. But as I said, we have new mandate, new challenges, and so we need to now start going beyond a bit taxonomy and disclosure. However, we also, as a main element we have in mind as a priority, we also acknowledge that there's a need of close cooperation between different public bodies, the Commission, the BCBS, the Network for Greening the Financial System, the ECB, and so on, to ensure that all the work that public bodies are doing of the ESG are consistent, coherent, harmonized. So here, that also a kind of constraint, or I don't know, a way of work or priority that we have is really to kind of trying to move the ESAs are moving all together in a kind of consistent way in the progress of integrating ESG into the regulatory framework. So now, going more specifically into what the EBA is doing in the area of ESG. So you can see on this slide that there are 6 main priorities that have been defined by the EBA. Some of them are more advanced than others. And so for the presentation today, I would like to, I will dig into each of these of this area. But obviously, as I said, the starting point is really about, progressing and reinforcing Pillar 3 disclosure on ESG. So EBA has been so far very, let's say, involved in the work that the Commission has been doing on taxonomy and also in the context of the SFDR. But the EBA has also been developing its own, let's say, ESG disclosure framework. And recently it has published a specific ITS about it. So I will mention that. The second core element, definition, which is really a strong priority for us, is to start integrating ESG aspects into risk management and supervision of the EU banking sector. So here again, some work has been done, and I will mention about it, but we need to progress a bit on that. Third aspect is about, and I know that there's always a large interest from the market on this, but it's about, how ESG exposure should be treated in the context of the prudential framework. So here, I would like to inform you that the EBA will soon publish a report on the prudential treatment of a discussion paper of the prudential treatment of ESG exposures. So that I would say that is the three blocks where deliverable will be certainly expecting in the short to medium terms. And then there are three other areas which are also key for us to develop and progress. But here we are still at a rather early stage. First of all, it's about stress testing. We had a pilot exercise that has been published in 2020, which paved the way for the development of further climate risk stress testing. But further work needs to be done. We also note, and I think this will be also a high interest for the EMF-ECBC, that now the debate about standards and label and so on is also now has also now to be considered by the supervisors. So we are now moving from something that was more let's say coordinated and leaded by the market, but now we're trying to see whether we need more regulatory and prudential view on label and standard. And then the last aspect, which is also a kind of a priority that we have, is to enhance our supervisory reporting. So on ESG disclosure, I think I will not extend too much on the overall context, because I think you are very well aware that this is an area where there are multiple developments, which is covering different scope. EBA has recently published its advice to the Commission on Article 8, which basically advises on how banks should disclose their portfolio alignment with the EU Taxonomy. So here we have provided an advice on the creation of a green asset ratio. And the second aspect, which has been a really core focus for us in the last year, was a new regulation, an ITS, on ESG disclosures. So this has been published in 2022. So this is something which is really new, I would say. And it is meant to ensure that stakeholders are well informed about the ESG risk of institution and on their strategy. So the ITS covers several aspects, but I think the key one that we should have, that we have really prioritized, is about the exposure, the disclosure of the exposures to the disclosure on the activities that are environmentally harmful to the banks. So here, the idea was to focus as a first step on climate risk. So we have identified a number of metrics for disclosing transition risk and physical risk. And as a next step, we will obviously cover later on the quantitative aspect, social risk. We expect the first set of data to be available, reported for end 2022. And obviously, we hope to have them made available to us in 2023, Q1. So here, EBA obviously acknowledges the difficulties to get all this data. We have tried to be very reasonable in defining those data. We aligned with the tax force on climate financial related disclosures, but we acknowledge the challenge. But I think this is an area where we need to move on, and that we will need to start collecting the data and encourage the bank also to and to rely and discuss with their counterparties to see how they can make progress in this area. Second aspect is about, as I said, is about ESG risk management and supervision. So active, I think we would all agree that active measurement and management of ESG risk is really key to ensure a smooth transition toward the more sustainable economy. We've published a report in 2021 where we've seen that there have been a lot of effort that is made by the industry to start, integrating the ESG risk into the internal risk management. But we also identify that there's much that should be done. And so the report included a number of recommendations in terms of definition, methodology. We've made already some progress on our side in updating a number of products. We've updated, for example, our guideline on loan origination and monitoring, who now provide some guidance on green loans. We have also updated our framework with regard to internal governance and remuneration. With regard to ESG risk supervision, as I said, this is something that we are also heavily focusing on. Without entering into too much detail, we are planning to update our SREP guidelines on this. And we are, have decided to adopt a kind of principle of proportionality, focusing first of all of the let's say biggest institution. And also we are suggesting to have a phase-in approach where we would first start on updating our supervisory framework with regard to business models and internal governance. And then on the second step, we will focus on liquidity risk and capital. On pillar one, so that we are, as you know, DBA has been mandated to deliver a report to advise the Commission on the extent to which the prudential framework should be amended to better integrate ESG exposure. A discussion paper will be published in a couple of weeks. This will be a first starting point. So this report will not include any conclusion or recommendation yet, but it will provide some initial thought on how, for example, existing mechanism within the framework would be already relevant. So for example, whether the extent to which external ratings, valuations and internal model would already capture environmental risk. He will also talk about the forward-looking nature of environmental risk and time horizon. But here, maybe to manage a bit the expectation, I think as a whole, DBA still acknowledges that, risk-based approach still remain the key one that should be, the heart of the CRR, because the overall objective is still to keep the resilience of the financial sector. And obviously, although we acknowledge the need to see how the framework should be efficient and should be better capturing this risk, we also acknowledge that should maybe not be a substitute for some policy tools, I would say. So yeah, so that will be a kind of area where we will need input from the industry to also help us understanding a little bit better how ESG elements and risk could be better embedded into the prudential framework. Another element is about standards and label. As I said, this is an area which is heavily of an interest from the Commission and the regulators now, as we understand it that this is really a key tool now to enhance the credibility and the transparency of the market, and especially considering that the green market, social market is expanding a lot. So here, to be very precise, to focus on maybe to put a little bit of focus on a particular topic. So in the context of the discussion of the EU Green Bond Standard, DBA has been required to produce a report to advise the Commission on the extent to which the EU Green Bond Standard would be relevant for securitization. So a report has been published in March, and here DBA, so it's available on our website. And here, the EBA has proposed a very pragmatic approach to green securitization to allow securitization to play a role in the financing of the transition toward a greener economy. And here, the EBA has basically advised that the securitization should be, the treatment of securitization should be aligned with the general intention of the EU Green Bond Standard, and so green securitization could be defined with regard to how the greenness of its use of proceeds, and so that the underlying asset should not be something that should be of a strong concern at this stage. But obviously, and I think this is also something that may be of relevance in the context of the covered bond. Yes, the focus at this stage is really about the use of proceeds, and that the regulators acknowledge this point. Although in the medium term, maybe this could be reassessed once we have more green collateral available in the market. Further work will also be done in the area of labeling. The EBA will be soon mandated with technical advice on how to define green retail loans and green mortgages, and what should be the supporting tool for it. So this is a work that is still at an early stage of process. We know that there has been a lot of initiatives that has been, initiated by, developed by the market, and we already had a dialogue with Luca Bertalot on this to see the extent to which we can leverage on the work that has been done by the EEMI. Another work that is of a strong priority for us is really providing an advice to the Commission on green risk and whether there's adequate supervisory power to deal with it. And also something which is more, let's say, forward-looking is a potential new label in the area of sustainable loans and bonds. And finally, and I'm realizing that I'm very late. I'm sorry for that, Richard. You can see now on your screen that there are several of areas where we don't have a clear planning or deadline yet, but which is also something that we prioritize. So maybe on the last topic, the macroprudential tool. So here there will be a report which will be published soon by the EBA, and which will basically specify our view on the extent to which environmental risk could be more embedded into the macroprudential framework of the EBA in terms of systemic risk, countercyclical buffer, and so on. And then, there are, as I said, two other areas, in particular stress testing, where there's a high interest and demand, especially from the Commission, to further develop climate risk stress testing. We have a lot of new mandates about it. We are still in the process of brainstorming on how all this could be achieved. And as you could see off the screen, many of these has to be done in a close cooperation with other EU agency, as we think that this is a topic that is, holistically important. And finally, as I said, there's a kind of need to better monitor climate risk, ESG risk in our framework. But here we are still lacking a lot of data and definition to do it. But that's also something that we are heavily working on. So yeah, so sorry for being so long, Richard, and I hope we still have some time for some questions.
Well, thank you, Mira. I think the key point is that it's a horizontal point.
Yeah.
There's not a green department. Every department has that input into its work. So I completely unfairly asked you to describe everything the EBA does in 30 minutes.
And actually asked my colleague Ali Erbilji, who's our disclosure expert, to support me on this, because especially disclosure is an area which is very growing very, very quickly, and we know that this is touching not only data but definition and several topics. But indeed, this is an horizontal topic. But the way we have decided to address it at DBA is still to have like a new team of experts that are really following the topic, because there are so many developments, and at the same time to also trying to kind of support our expert on stress tests and so on, to kind of also start embedding the topic into their own expertise, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've only got one question, and it's a question you're not allowed to say no to, which is, can you come back to a future Bauhaus event and go into more detail on a couple of the specific tasks? Now, personally, I'm fascinated by the green asset ratio and by the risk weights of green exposures. But let's ask other people in the audience to come back to us over the next few days with, of all of these things that you've mentioned, which would like a deeper dive on. So hopefully, Mira, you'll be able to join us again for a future event, and we can go into more detail on some of these topics. And apologies for trying to squeeze you into half an hour with so much. But thank you.
No, I apologize for taking so long, actually.
Thank you. We're now going to move on to the green bond market. We've had a few presentations in the past from happy users of this market, people who managed to have successful transactions based on their green mortgages. And that those are very interesting things, I think, though it's time to take a step back and look at the overall green bond market. And to do this, we've got one of the leading banks in that area, LBBW, and particularly the head of primary markets there, Patrick Seifert. Patrick, could you please talk us through this wonderful success story that is green bonds?
Yeah, well, I think the success story is a long book, and I'm fairly hopeful that there will be many chapters to to come. So from that point of view, half an hour is going to be a challenge, but then again, we'll try to make it as short as possible, at least for some flavor, and also to look at what the green bond and the green covered bonds obviously have been able to achieve as of late, and which role they could play going forward with the new, what we call the new realities. Not only in markets, but also in, let's say, world politics. So having said that, thank you for obviously having us. Thanks for mentioning our firm commitment to ESG. I think it's fair to say that the LBBW group, which also includes Berlin Hub, since late is the largest issue of ESG debt among the commercial banks in Europe. It started quite early, obviously. I personally recall having worked on covered bonds and green bonds for more or less 10 years or so. So I like to believe we know a thing. And again, happy to share this with all of you and happy to take questions as they arise. So let's take the first kind of technical challenge, whether we are able to get the presentation on screen. I think that needs a bit of additional assistance. Let me just check again.
So we're seeing your WebEx screen.
I think the WebEx screen works, but for some reason the presentation isn't showing up. Let me see. Can we have it on screen from your side, potentially?
Yes,
maybe
yes,
that's
I will share it.
Okay,
Listen,
then I will end over here, and you just take the PDF I sent earlier. And and meanwhile, I'll share with you latest data from a survey of the University of Chicago. They've been asking investors active in the field of real estate markets how they feel about climate risk, and climate risk being reflected in current asset prices. Probably no big surprise, 67% actually saying that climate risk is not sufficiently reflected in prices. 1% saying it's reflected more than enough in current asset prices. So in other words, basically almost 70 times more people basically believe that there is still risk in that sector that is currently not visible, potentially not priced in, and hence has to adjust one way or another. I hate to 100% agree with the EBA, but I think the point that was made early on by Mira obviously is a need for transparency, a need basically for communicating, let's say, how that real estate sector is transforming, and hence again we can be more or less sure that investors will have a very, very close eye into how that sector is evolving in the next couple of years, and how individual let's say asset owners, asset originators basically will address the topic of climate risk and ESG. So just to remind, 67-1 is a ratio of those who think there is still more climate risk to come than already reflected in current asset prices. Having said that, if we start with what is probably a bit of an obvious slide on page number 2, again, we realize that real estate sector is absolutely key when it comes to climate risk. It's consuming round about 35% of physical resources. I like to believe the range is fairly large, depending on location, etc. But again, ballpark number, 1/3 of natural resources being consumed by the real estate sector. So I think that's definitely too big to ignore. And if we look at the particularities of, let's say, or the payoff structures, we could say, of real estate projects, we have that particular situation, obviously, of a major one-off, which is typically the construction itself, the investment, the way that natural resources are being consumed when a building is established. And then obviously we have that running cost, that running damage also being done by real estate when it comes to emissions produced in buildings and their impact off the ground. So if we believe that those investors are kind of right, and if we share the view that this real estate sector has to basically green much more than it currently does at the moment, we are more or less facing a historic reallocation of capital. I think there can be little doubt about that. If we look at what has happened in the last couple of years, and that's what we basically see on page number 3, is that the market that is trying to basically reflect this reality, to look at that risk, to understand let's say, where exactly money is being put to work when it comes to energy efficient investments in the real estate sector. Yeah, we've gone a long way. As I said, the book on green bonds and green covered bonds is already fairly, I'd say, extensive. Started 2015 with the Paris Climate Agreement, which was certainly some kind of a milestone. Has evolved both on the back of market-led initiatives and also regulatory initiatives have translated into the EU Taxonomy that was mentioned earlier on, the EU Green Bond Standards, and again, in all fairness, also to give praise to the Energy Efficient Mortgage Initiative and all the involved stakeholders for preparing the ground when it comes to establishing energy efficient housing at the core of, let's say, business origination and again directing capital to where it's needed. The 3 priorities around this is, again, not only directing the capital to where it needs to go, but also to managing those sustainability risks and promoting transparency. And basically the flip side of the coin is obviously greenwashing here, because just declaring something green obviously won't make the trick. So from that point of view, as much as we like to believe that this is a good course, we also have to make sure that, again, the use of proceeds is happening on the back of, let's say, rational decision-making and ultimately delivering the returns that we're looking for. If we look at how the green bond market has evolved, I think Richard was fairly enthusiastic about it, and there is no reason to question that. On the next page, you'll see the growth that we have seen in recent years, really exponential. We've shown over here basically the ESG, let's say, bonds. This includes all of the sections from green to social to sustainable, and also sustainable linked bonds. I think the volume, again, growing year by year very, very strongly. And if we go one step further, we'll see that this also holds for the green bond market very specifically. What I like to highlight on the green bonds, again, you can blame us for being enthusiastic and optimistic when it comes to 2022. But I think one thing is for sure is that if you look at the geographical breakdown also of where these green bonds come from, Europe is basically accounting for some 60% of it. And in terms of currency, the market is mostly dominated by euro issuance. So we could really say that the green bond market is a European market. It's our market, basically, and that also means we have a responsibility not only to grow it, but also to shape it, and to shape it according to the purpose that we have. And this certainly also includes policy purpose and policy objectives, as has been mentioned in the introduction by both Luca and Richard. So having said that, the market is just as nice as every single transaction. Let's look at an individual trade, a trade that I like a lot, and you will see that one on the next page. OP Mortgage Bank from Finland, again, with credit to all the groundwork, which obviously enabled us to launch this transaction. It was launched just recently in end of March. This means basically after the invasion in Ukraine, fairly, I would say, challenging market conditions. Nevertheless, a very successful trade. So what is this telling us? It's basically also telling us that investors like this asset class take a lot of comfort from that asset class in saying, I do not only buy real estate, but I buy real estate where I have a direct link basically to energy efficiency, because I believe that this sub-asset class, so to speak, will be delivering more stable results, will potentially be of even higher value. And the point that you might be particularly interested to look at is on the bottom right, the small breakdown of ESG categories. It basically means that some 58% of investors have some kind of an ESG background. So very clearly so, investors look at ESG criteria. They appreciate that transparency and disclosure that was being referred to, and that extra kind of quality and comfort being provided through green bonds. It also means that, which is probably more of a personal view, but nevertheless, that we've reached some kind of a point of no return, because if, let's say, 60% or 2/3 of the market is looking at ESG, it's kind of, I would say, a lost cause to believe that, that will go back to where we were before. There is no reason for it, there is no need for it, and that's why we think it makes sense to embrace that change going forward. If we look now into that transparency that's being provided, again, in that example of the OP Mortgage Bank transaction, we see on the next page that basically information being provided, so-called use of proceeds that was mentioned before. Again, very much along the lines of the sustainability development goals mentioned earlier on, and that obviously provides some kind of a foundation for everything we do in that field. And then when it comes to green buildings, obviously you have the acquisition, the construction, which is again that initial type of, let's say, investment, and then obviously ongoing renovation, which ideally will translate into a more energy efficient use of housing going forward. Plus a reference to taxonomy, which is obviously just showing that the latest standards need to be adopted and included as we go. So pretty much a beauty of a green bond, of a green covered bond, if I may say. And the question is, what's the problem then? The problem is that, there is still a conventional bond, so to speak. If we look at it through an energy efficient, let's say, mortgage lens, we have to figure out that there is still some 80% or so in conventional formats. And the question is, how can we get those, let's say, into a green format? The question is definitely one that becomes more pressing as we go. And the next slide is kind of a, gentle reminder, so to speak, that since the beginning of the crisis, I think we have to look at energy consumption in a much different manner, because first of all, prices are going up quite considerably. We see that here in terms of charts. Coal still a bit more affected by sanctions. We have the French elections on the weekend, and maybe we could also imagine that the European, let's say, Union is taking a bit more of a firmer stance after the election take place when it comes to deliveries of gas, for example. But then beyond the economic cost, there's obviously a huge political cost attached to, let's say, importing gas from Russia, which is then in turn using that money to fund a war in the middle of Europe. I think that that's a situation that is basically unacceptable. Maybe more of a personal view, but I think if anything, it's telling us that we have gone a bit too far in terms of, let's say, dependencies, and we have to scale that back. And one way certainly to scale back, let's say, energy purchases from outside Europe is basically to reduce the consumption. So if we go one step further, I would kind of argue that since September 24th, the cost of weight has dramatically increased, and all of the good reasons that were there before already in saying we need to reduce climate risk to achieve our net zero carbon commitments in Europe, that those stand anyway. Those investors kind of sense already that staying in the conventional, i.e. non-energy efficient, let's say, real estate sector means that they can expect diminishing returns. We are talking some 40% here until 40% of returns until the end of that decade. That's based on a study by McKinsey. So again, there's no reason really to stay, let's say, in the old world, but rather let's say, to embrace that what we called green renaissance, a term that I think the EMF and ECBC has been fairly vocal about. I think it also fits very nicely the renovation wave that has been also discussed on behalf of the European Union, because it's not only about sustainable, let's say, housing, but also about creating jobs and potentially making Europe more independent for generally a better living. So I think there is a lot of side effects. Basically, again, the world order is changing. So I think we have a case certainly to make Europe more strong, to reinvent housing in a way. I'm not a housing expert, but from what I understand is a lot of things will need to change. A lot of that will need to be funded. And then there is ways, obviously, to create value in those sectors. For example, through housing that looks much more like what we are showing here on the right-hand side of things, local energy generation and storage, green buildings typically more attractive to tenants, new / more recyclable building materials, extra services, tracking emissions obviously will become relevant when we talk about transparency and so on. So from that point of view, really a task that is meanwhile beyond individual decision makings as an investor, but it's really also becoming a bit of a European duty. So I'll kind of conclude around those thoughts with what is the last slide that we have over here. Not so much a recipe for how exactly we have to go about, but I think we have to certainly understand that there is a time value of money, and that time value of money is much bigger than before. So we shouldn't be wasting time. Again, as happy as we were that the Paris Climate Agreement was found, it's 7 years ago, yeah. The green bond market now is kind of, reaching levels that certainly we could not have imagined a couple of years ago, but then again, still long way to go, still 80% or so to kind of tackle in a way. And we think to that extent, we need to be promoting energy efficient, I would call it product bundles. So also meaningful kind of, cooperation between not only banks, but also, let's say, providers of, let's say, building solutions. Certainly a lot of that can and should be developed in Europe, and can be also a source of, let's say, economic growth, and bringing back some jobs that have been relying more heavily on, let's say, globalization. We also believe that fiscal policy initiatives need to be support market mechanism. I think that term was referred to earlier on also. The market is certainly working the right way, but the question is the market fast enough? Potentially not. So we have to bundle all of the forces here. We certainly have to facilitate reinvestments when it comes to energy efficient housing, in my view. And again, we should be increasing the cost of waiting for owners. Russia has been certainly a timely reminder from that point of view. And as much as anyone in the covered bond industry, and hence LBBW is no difference, we like to, let's say, preserve that particular value that covered bonds have. We might also have to think about some kind of a transitionary type of, let's say, asset class. Some call it amber market. We could think about the sustainability linked bonds, i.e. a particular format that provides commitment to channel funds into energy efficient housing, even so that is not yet happening basically in time zero. In other words, basically bridging that gap from now into a couple of years from now, when all of these initiatives, hopefully in a coordinated manner, will have basically created the necessary impact, and that renovation wave that I spoke about before. Last word on the ECB policies. The ECB, as a lot of you might know, is kind of scaling back its purchasing programs. So this means there will be less support from there. It means also that those investors that we spoke about before, that are kind of, I wouldn't say concerned, but they are having a very close look at the climate risk in the real estate sector, will have more of a say going forward. So in other words, every good reason to be very, I would say, listening to their concern, and basically entering into regular exchange around the green covered bond market with them. But it also means that potentially, as the ECB is scaling back some of their purchases, at least they could realign some of the existing purchases to support sustainability in a broader sense. Just to mention at this point in time that only 20% of green bonds at the moment are ECB eligible. Personally, I think that's a slightly misaligned type of policies at the moment. And again, with every respect to the ECB, but the message is really we have to kind of have an all-for-one approach. It's not just individual households who can basically get the job done. They need to be at the origin of it, but they need the support. And I think at the same time, given the ongoing challenge we have in Europe now, the cost of waiting is just too high. But I think Europe also has demonstrated a very firm approach when it comes to what's happening in Russia. And I think we should be equally committed, let's say, to getting the energy efficient, let's say, renovation wave going. It can be big steps, it can be small steps. But as long as we keep moving, I think it's the right thing to do. The time is now. And that would be my concluding remark. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Patrick. On that last point about the ECB, I think it was a couple of editions of the Bauhaus ago, we had a presentation on exactly that topic and lobbying efforts to try to improve the treatment of green bonds in the ECB repo. So that's well worth looking at if you're interested in that topic. We've had a question from the audience, and it's actually basically the same question that I was going to ask. I'm going to slightly expand on it if I can. The question was about the greenium. That OP Mortgage Bank trade that you spoke about, 5.5 year, 1 billion, how would that have looked if it wasn't green? Would it have been a higher interest rate? Would it have been less investors? Would it have been more difficult for you to sell? What difference did it make?
I like to believe that the execution would have been more uncertain in the market that we were at the time. It was a 1 billion transaction. So at the time that the ECB was slowly starting to scale back their purchases. So from that point of view, again, I would certainly not want to create the impression that OP Mortgage Bank is not strong enough to do a transaction. They definitely are, but I think it helped them to, basically raise funding in the maturity that they were interested to, and still achieve the size that they wanted through obviously more investor engagement. So in other words, there is a potential risk that they could not have achieved all of their objectives if this transaction would not have been green, which means either smaller size or maybe slightly smaller maturity. I think, in fact, the topic of maturity is quite relevant because at the time the market was extremely volatile and investors kind of were avoiding, let's say, to be too exposed in terms of, let's say, duration. So from that point of view, I think the trade in green had a better outcome than a conventional bond would have achieved. Not dramatically better, but certainly better and more stable. And so from that point of view, setting the right example.
Okay, we had another very interesting question. Clearly, that bond follows the taxonomy alignment. It talks about taxonomy compliant bonds in terms of energy efficiency. But the question from the audience, Benjamin, thank you for this question. Do you also check for the do no significant harm rule within the criteria? And if so, is it difficult getting data about that?
Yes, it is difficult. And again, I would take that beauty of a green covered bond as a reference example of, how much proactive you can be. Not everyone actually is able to deliver that. So from that point of view, I think we're still seeing a bit of a gradual, let's say, upgrades into incorporating those new standards that have been set, in particular on the regulatory front. And then sometimes, there is more data available and sometimes there is less data available. I know of a transaction, for example, that we are potentially preparing in 2 weeks' time or so from a jurisdiction that is, in all fairness, probably less advanced than Finland and less advanced than OP Mortgage Bank. Hence, probably not a big surprise that the level of disclosure will be less good. But then again, it will be a very first one from that jurisdiction. So I think that's also something that we probably have to accept, that still there is a bit of a, I would say, regional split in how advanced certain markets are as opposed to others. But I think the end goal and the end, let's say, objective is fairly clear. That basically you have to move into that direction of providing all of the necessary data that investors will be looking for, and then they have a bit of a discretionary, I would say, decision making, saying, well, I can live with a little less disclosure if, for example, there is no particular alternatives, or there is good reasons and still strong commitments to deliver data and information at some point in time later during the transaction. I mean, let's not forget, a lot of these bonds have longer lifetimes, so you sometimes have a little bit of time to make up for, let's say, missing information.
Mm-hmm. Well, the data question, it wasn't planted, but it is a very smooth link to our next presentation. But for now, Patrick, thank you so much for your presentation today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Moving on to the next presentation. Yes, data, the ability to measure the actual energy consumption of buildings and to integrate that into decision process is something that now Knauf Energy Solutions, and particularly CEO Barry Linham, have been focusing on. Barry, can I ask you to talk through what it is that Knauf does and how it fits into the overall process?
Of course, thank you, Richard, and thank you also to Luca and the team for inviting me today. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all. I'm not from the banking sector, so I hope I'm still understandable, and I'll try and explain a little bit about what we're doing and how we're doing it. I'll try and share my screen now. Hope it works. Is the presentation now available?
It is. We're in that. Perfect. Yep, perfect.
Great. Thank you very much. So just a little bit, Knauf, for those of you who don't know who Knauf Energy Solutions, who we are, we're part of the German Knauf Group, a 13 billion euro turnover construction products company group. Knauf Energy Solutions ourselves, we are actually really focused on the energy transition, particularly in the area of energy efficiency in buildings. And what we try to do is bring a breakthrough technology in terms of understanding the real data and as Richard was saying, to understand really what's happening in energy efficiency in buildings, so we can understand exactly the performance change before and after. And I think, as Patrick mentioned, the green bond market is a very European thing. So is energy efficiency. Most of the largest companies in the world who focus on energy efficiency are European, and I think it's a very, very important point in terms of thinking about how we go forward and how we build a European marketplace, which is positive for citizens across Europe. I'm going to talk a little bit today about one of our areas of focus is really around data and understanding really the data transparency around energy efficiency. One of the things that we've noted for many years is that it's been incredibly difficult on the energy efficiency side to know to what we actually do get from energy efficiency renovations, both at the policymaker level, the homeowner level, but also at the banking level. What do we actually see in terms of real improvements and real changes? And we've obviously the best thing we've had to date is really around things like energy performance certificates, which we know are not a very good substitute for real data. And what we're trying to do as a company is use some of the digital innovations, particularly around sensor technology and machine learning capabilities, to put that right and get to a place where we absolutely do understand the exact energy efficiency improvements that we're seeing, so we can get the kind of data flows that allow this market to work. And we think this issue is not just a data transparency issue. It's actually our whole perspective on this is that the reason we're not seeing energy efficiency renovations take their proper role and their proper place in the energy transition is because of this lack of data and the market failure that this lack of data actually creates. And that this is so much more than just a data question. It really is about fundamentally how we make buildings part of the transition correctly and how we actually get those renovation rates up to the 3% per year that we really need, and not down at 0.3 where they are today. So that's kind of what I'll talk a bit about today and explain. And I think to sort of build on previous speakers' view on terms of the importance of energy efficiency in buildings, we've been doing a lot of work recently on the electrification of energy, because we have this two-fold thing happening at the moment. We have on one side, of course, the climate change necessities, which is looking at decarbonization, but also we're seeing this particularly now, obviously, with the Russian gas question, a very, very strong perspective on electrification of heating. And that changes the world of housing. It changes the world of heating, because it goes from something based on gas reserves, which can easily be managed on a daily peak and on an annual peak basis, to an electricity environment which has very, very different constraints. And this makes it even more important for energy efficiency. So as we start to see this move to a renewable-based electricity system, but also a decarbonized and electrified sectors like transport, buildings, and industry, the challenge of electrification, the challenge of energy efficiency becomes so much bigger. When we looked at the European Commission's ambition of delivering 70% of heating in Europe in homes, so in residential homes from electricity, we looked at its meeting about 221 gigawatts of additional capacity that's needed in Europe to deliver that objective as a base load. So not in terms of peak load, but in terms of the load to the overall system. When we start looking at the challenges of peak, though, of the daily constraints of when we use electricity, which is not flat across the day and not flat across the year, that 221 gigawatts is just the base load request. It doesn't tell us much about the peak load request. As I say, we have both daily constraints, people coming home at the end of the day to start heating their homes. Therefore, we're seeing much larger peaks between the classic 6 to 10 o'clock the evening and in the morning when people get up. And we're seeing that kind of those demands, which are very, very demanding on the energy system. But we also have this winter issue. We also have the fact that when do we need electricity for heat? We need it during the winter. When will renewables be at their lowest? When will solar be at the lowest? When will wind often be low? It's often in the winter months as well. So we have a combination with huge peak demands potentially in the winter months, with very, very low production capabilities in a renewable and even with a nuclear-based environment. And we've been looking at that challenge for a couple of governments, actually. We've been looking at that challenge for the UK, but also for the German market, to understand what does this kind of difference between this huge peak demand and this huge trough in terms of production mean for the economy. And what we notice is that for every kilowatt of electricity saved from energy efficiency, we actually reduce 5 kilowatts of generation capacity. So this is a very, very important question, because it means that from the old days, we really thought about energy efficiency in terms of saving energy for the homeowner. And therefore, the homeowner was fundamentally responsible for paying for those savings based on the saved energy. And of course, as the energy prices are rising now, that becomes more and more attractive and a more and more interesting sort of proposition for consumers and for lending, therefore, into that market. But actually, what we see as we move from a gas-based environment to an electrically heated environment is that the peak demands and the capacity needed to manage those peak demands becomes the actual economic driver behind energy efficiency renovation. Was, I say, this 1 to 5 kilowatt difference. So one kilowatt saved in a house, reducing the demand at the capacity level by 5 kilowatts. And when we turn that into an economic analysis of the cost of renovating houses versus the cost of building capacity, we see that the cost of renovation is about 68% cheaper now than building that additional capacity. So you get these very, very strong sort of overall energy system benefits, which have never been baked into the energy efficiency programs or into the way that we look at energy efficiency. Because fundamentally, up until now, we've been seeing this as a gas market, and this gas market didn't really worry too much about daily peaks or winter peaks. But an electricity market is very, very, very sensitive to these peaks, particularly one based on renewable energy. And so these are the kind of things that we think about when we're doing that. And it just means that getting the renovation rate to where it needs to be becomes not only incredibly important for climate change, it becomes also incredibly important for any chance of having a generation system which is able to cope with the kind of demand that we're starting to put on it, without going into ridiculously high costs of generation and massive additional amounts of generation to deal with these peaks. And our issue is that if we're honest about where we are today, we're really at around 0.2, 0.3% renovation rates when we're looking at deep renovation. We're not anywhere near the 3% renovation rates that we would need to tackle the climate change objectives by 2050, and nowhere near where we would need to be to get the 48, I think, billion cubic meters of gas, which the Repower EU initiative says would be necessary to get us off Russian gas by the end of the decade. And so we asked ourselves as a company over the last few years, is that what is driving this failure in terms of renovation rates? And lots of people talk about it. Is it a lack of information for customers? Is it a lack of financing? I've spoken to many banks like yourselves and mortgage lenders, and everyone tells me there's plenty of financing for energy efficiency, but there's a lack of projects for energy efficiency. It's not a financing challenge, it's a project challenge. When we look at it, is there an engineering challenge? Do we not know how to make houses energy efficient? It's not an engineering challenge. We know very well how to make houses energy efficient, and we can become even much more cost effective over time if we do it correctly. What we think is that fundamentally the lack of transparent data on energy efficiency creates a major market failure, which drives the lack of uptake of energy efficiency renovation. And the way I try to always explain this in the most simple terms, the market failure is called the market for lemons. It's, if you know Akerov, the American economist, he won the Nobel Prize for this theory in 2001. But in basic terms, to understand the market failure, I always try to give the example of wind farms. If we were to build wind farms and to reward wind farms in a completely different way, so rather than paying for the kilowatts of energy produced by those wind farms and making basically paying for the performance of the wind farms, instead we just stood on the edge of the sea and we looked out to sea and we counted the number of blades, and we paid for the number of blades that we could see on those windmills. What would that market look like? Would that be a market where bankers would be very happy to invest in that market? Would that be a market with very good data transparency? Would that be a market where governments will say, okay, we've got these wind farms so we can shut down these coal plants? Or would it be a market where people try to make as many fake blades as possible, where the quality is low, where performance doesn't count, where governments don't take it too seriously? My hypothesis would be if we paid the number of blades rather than kilowatt hours produced, that's what would happen. But that's exactly what we do in housing today. We pay for insulation in the roof, we pay for windows, we pay for boilers, we pay for new doors. We do not pay for the performance that changes. And that creates a major market failure where the market is no longer incentivized to drive up quality and drive down price, because that's not how you win in this market. You win in this market by getting away with the worst job possible and getting paid for that with the biggest subsidy possible. The incentive structures are completely wrong, and you can't blame the market actors. It's not their fault. The problem is the market. The market is failing, and it's a classic, very well economic theory, the market for lemons. This happens, markets don't work. And we're seeing that exactly in this market. And we see this is, for us, was really, really fundamentally the problem. And so we decided that the best way to deal with that is to solve it. And that's what we went away and did. And we developed a digital technology that allows us to meter energy efficiency as accurately as you can meter energy production. So rather than guessing how much an energy efficiency renovation in a private house delivers, we now use a mix of sensor technology, artificial intelligence algorithms to determine exactly that change. And what it means is that we can now calculate exactly how much savings are being made day after day because of the renovation. We could provide CO2 data in terms of the amount of CO2 being saved day after day because of the renovation. We can understand whether new technologies are actually delivering improvements, cost improvements, and better quality. And we can finally have a feedback loop on the works being done themselves so that consumers and people who are in lenders can be confident that when the works are done, the works actually deliver savings, that the customer actually is in a better default position than they were before, and that we haven't actually done the reverse, given people additional revenue and different lending and not improved their energy efficiency and put them in a worse position in terms of default. We think this is critical to making the market work, and we've brought that technology to bear. To explain very simply, we use a group of sensor technology which goes into the house, which takes basic data sets like CO2 data, humidity data, indoor temperature. That is mixed with outdoor weather data, which allows us to create what we call the negawatt hour graph, or the negawatt hour capability. And in very simple terms, what you're seeing here on the graphic here is that before we renovate, which is the black line in the middle, what we do is we try to get the algorithm using all the data that it gets from the sensors to understand the fundamental performance of the building, of the individual, every single house that we're looking at. So every single house that we would look at, we will work out before we renovate it what the real performance of that house is. To test the algorithm's quality, how well it has understood the performance of any specific house, we simply ask it to guess the energy use of that house, and we compare that to the real energy use that we're monitoring on the house itself on an hourly basis in the houses. And the closer the red line and the gray is, which is the one which is the guess of the estimate from the algorithm and the actual energy use, the better we know the energy efficiency of the house before renovation. After renovation, this allows us to do two things. It allows us to continue monitoring the energy use in the house, but also it allows us to ask the algorithm how much energy that house would have used if we hadn't renovated it. And that's the dotted red line that you're seeing on the right side. And the yellow area is the energy being saved, or the kilowatt hours being saved day after day because we made the renovation. The complete data transparency that you need to know whether you made the house better and whether the consumer is actually saving energy day after day and how much they're saving per day. It also allows us, because we see the house post retrofit, we can develop a view of the house post retrofit, is that across an entire series of buildings, we're able to look at the houses, the performance of that building in terms of its assets from an asset owner's perspective, where it was before and where it was after, what we call a real energy performance certificate. So it actually now, for the first time, we actually know the change to a very, very accurate level. What was the energy demand beforehand? What is the energy demand afterward? Stripping out all human behavior, all weather behavior, and normalizing to a data set. So it gives us something that we've really never had, something that the energy performance certificates were supposed to deliver, but unfortunately haven't been able to deliver because of some of the core problems inside that methodology, which makes it hard. And I think what this gives us is finally the chance to really understand energy efficiency at a true level. And that, of course, allows the market to start functioning correctly. It enables, banks to lend into the space. It allows one-stop shop companies like ourselves to exist, who can deliver projects from beginning to end and to make sure that they're delivered with quality, because for the first time, quality actually matters. But more importantly, it starts to allow us to start thinking about how we can boost this market and make this market go correctly by using the kinds of policy instruments that are so effective for renewables. So the renewable market did a great job, both in terms of the offshore wind, onshore wind, and solar, by paying for performance, paying for the kilowatt hours that were produced, and paying things like the feed-in tariff structures, the green certificate structures in countries, which really allowed a market not only to develop, but actually do what you want markets to do. Drive down price, drive up quality, and get off subsidy over time so that you can actually have a very functioning market. We've never seen that in the energy efficiency market. If you look back over the last 20 years, the cost of renovation just gets more and more expensive year after year after year. We've seen none of the kinds of trends that we've seen in the renewable sector in this sector. And our premise is because you haven't paid for performance ever before, and you weren't able to pay for performance. So we don't sit here and we don't criticize the current energy efficiency framework. We don't criticize energy performance certificates. We don't criticize the way that governments have put things in place. That's what was possible even 5 years ago. The world has been transformed by digital technologies the last decade, and we've used some of those digital technologies and those machine learning algorithms to be able to do things that we just simply couldn't do cost effectively in the past. This kind of analysis would have cost thousands per house in the past. Now we're talking in hundreds of euros per house to be able to do this kind of analysis every single house, every single time. And as I say, that allows the chance to innovate in policy instruments and create for things like megawatt hours, where we actually pay for the performance, and to simplify the way we do energy savings. That can allow, for example, completely new financing structures. So we can start looking at, for example, simplified support mechanisms where we develop, just like we did in the renewable sector, upfront financing to be delivered over time by real savings. So we create new economic flows and new data flows that allow us to actually stimulate this market correctly, getting everyone in the same boat, driving towards better quality, lower prices, a very, very guaranteed saving environment where there's confidence both on the regulatory perspective, but also on the banking perspective and also on the consumer perspective, that if we do this work, we'll actually get savings, and we can start to simplify and integrate things, for example, such as the cost to the grid of not doing this into the payments in a way that makes this whole market much more simple and much more effective. And we believe if we can do that, we can really transform the market. We often talk about energy efficiency being the first fuel, but the reality is it's not. If you look at where the money flows are today, we see around 211 billion going into efficiency. We about 1.6 trillion in OECD countries going into power generation, new capacity, new power generation. Our belief is that the fundamental block is that we've never been able to measure energy efficiency in the building stock the way that we do it for energy production. But now that we can have these conversations about how we transfer that across, and we can discuss with people like the European Commission as they consider the Repower initiative, how could we create things like power, rather than power purchase agreements, efficiency purchase agreements, or feed out tariffs, so that we can marry those to things like increased mortgage offers or the green mortgage offers to consumers, so they get a guaranteed revenue stream from government based on the real performance. The banking sector gets a very clear view of the actual data transparency of what's happening in these houses, so we know that they're green bonds. We don't have to do surveys across millions of homes. No, we just need an API from every single home that's renovated straight into the system to give exact data on what we're saving, to be sure that we're actually delivering the points. And to give you a sense of where we are, because I saw those criteria that Patrick, you put up in terms of the green bonds, and typical projects that we're looking at are saving between 36 and 40%. Those are the typical kind of real performance savings that we're seeing across those projects. So they're well within that kind of criteria. And the ticket size of those projects are they go from as little as 8 or 9,000 for euros for the cheapest and most cost-effective measures, up to about 35,000 euros when you're getting to slightly more difficult things where you're having to replace external roofs, for example, on flat roofs, or difficult situations where you have additional measures beyond the energy efficiency itself to make sure the house is able to continue its lifespan. So our message is really that the technology is now there to make this market very transparent, that doing so will reverse what's been a terrible market failure and will allow us to get to there. But what we need is obviously what we're asking for, and I know that people like Luke and others and Jennifer at EMI have been very sort of open to some of these views, is like, how do we get the EU now to support pay for performance and support this kind of approach so we can solve the economic failure and get this market working and make sure that huge amounts of finance can go into renovating houses and not into paying for gas. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Barry. That's a very, very smart technological solution you've got there. Your comments about the EPC, though, I want to explore a little bit of that. I see the limitations of the EPC, but it is by far the best information source we have at the moment. It is intuitive, it is easy to understand. We have it enshrined in a lot of what we think about and what we do. But my question for you is, how much have you back tested your megawatt hours chart to EPC? And is there a strong correlation? And the next question, could you then use your work, your analysis, to kind of devise a better form of EPC, something which is easy, intuitive, and straightforward, but is actually more accurate to mapping actual energy savings?
Yes, so let's tackle the second question first. Yeah, so it's very easy for us to bring us back into the EPC. So an EPC has at its core, one of the core things an EPC tries to do is to understand the energy demand of the house. It uses that through a tick box exercise of going around the house, guessing what we think is the energy efficiency of it, with some certain analysis behind that at every national level to say, okay, based on that, what do we think the energy consumption is? We can easily simply replace that energy demand sort of a calculation, which is very poor, with a real one, and then maintain the other things. For example, the presumed energy use, the presumed weather data, which can normalize. We ourselves normalize to our own data sets, but we can easily normalize to a government data set if that's more appreciated. On this first question, unfortunately, so we've had our system tested in the UK by the UK government to see whether our accuracy is where we believe it to be, not against the EPC, but against a much stronger way of looking at how performance of buildings are measured, and we are ridiculously accurate in terms of our plus or minus. We're less than plus or minus 5% on that data set in terms of our ability to know the exact performance of the house. When we back test against the EPCs, though, unfortunately the data that we find is that the EPCs are wildly inaccurate, and they're wildly inaccurate in different directions. So we've done tests, for example, on houses in Belgium, where we found the house to be at around 140 kilowatts per square meter. The EPC was suggesting it was at 650. We have another one in Belgium where the EPC said the house was at was at 20 kilowatts. It was a hyper expensive, super low energy renovation. We found the house to be at 220, and the rather incredibly high energy bills of the person living in the house, I think, rather suggest that our assessment was correct and the EPC assessment was deeply flawed. And we know why it was deeply flawed. It had misunderstood a huge amount of mistakes which had been made at the level of the renovation itself. So when we looked at that house, we understood that the people renovating it had done a ton of mistakes, and that's impossible for the EPC to know, because they can't know that, for example, behind the wall, the insulation was badly done. They can't know that they hadn't insulated the walls between the houses, or they hadn't managed the air tightness in different places. Our system does. Our system does that naturally. Is what it does in the background. It understands the real situation of the house without us having to know anything about the house itself. And so that's it's unfortunate. Yes, I mean, I was one of the people who pushed very strongly for energy performance certificates, more than a decade ago. I even took the European Commissioner to a European school in Brussels and gave him an EPC from Bob the Builder, the cartoon character, and said, go and do this and make this happen. And we believed that the data would be really good and would make a better situation. We haven't changed our opinion. The data wasn't very good yet. And now digital technologies mean that we can have really good data. The world's changed, right? The world simply changed in the last few years. You could not do what you can do today. Our own kits, our own sensor kits cost 10% today what they cost 3 years ago. The price drops in this space are so radical and so quick that they allow things to happen today that could never happen in the past. But they're becoming more critical, very, very critical, as we go to a heat pump based society, because getting your heat pump wrong in a house, which you think is 20 kilowatts and it's actually 220, will cause major problems, particularly financially for the homeowner, which then will cause problems for those people who've invested in that home and supported those renovations.
On a very different note, your charts of consumption over the day and over the year are very interesting. I guess they're very cultural specific. Hotter countries will have more air conditioning and less heating, whatever. But one question we've had from the audience is whether working from home is changing that pattern. Does the peak demand smooth because we're not commuting so much?
So I wouldn't say our data sets are big enough to at the moment to give that kind of data. I think that my guess is yes. I guess that we have a smoothing of the energy use. What we don't have though is a smoothing of the annual one. So when we've done the assessment for Germany and the UK, what we see is that energy today, electricity demand across the year is pretty much flat. In a electrically heated world, you get a very big U shape with extremes at January to January, where you have the coldest temperatures. Very logical, right? Which is that during the winter seasons, you're going to see massive peaks in electricity demand compared to today. And in summer, you're going to be having a massive overcapacity in terms of your electricity generation. In that, if you're going to build enough electricity generation for that winter peak as you electrify. The only really way we see that you can deal with that is trying to drop that peak as aggressive as you possibly can.
All right, thank you so much for your presentation today and for answering the questions. It's great to have the diversity in this Bauhaus, all of these different approaches, and as they say, now for something completely different. We're going to move on to our final session of the day, to the Dutch Energy Efficient Mortgage Hub, who are presented before at this event. Specifically this time, Piet Hein Schram. Piet Hein has been trying to understand Chapter 7 of the taxonomy and trying to get into the details of it and learn and understand all of those little details that we have to deal with day to day. Piet Hein, can I ask you to present what you discovered on that?
Yes, Richard, of course. And thank you for the opportunity to be on the Bauhaus podium again. I calculated in Excel that it's exactly 332 days ago that Vincent, my brother in arms, was on the stage sharing with you the first steps of the Dutch hub. And yeah, we really appreciate the opportunity to talk you through how much we've learned and what we've done in the past year. And as you said, a very large part of that is going through the Section 7 of the EU Taxonomy, word by word, footnote by footnote, because there are quite a few, as those of you that have read the Section 7 know very well. For those of you that don't know the Dutch hub, we are organized slightly differently than some of the other national hubs. we've set up an association, and currently we have 23 members, which is a combination of mortgage lenders and other stakeholders in the Dutch mortgage market. And in addition to the 23 members, we have approximately 20 plus affiliated members, so they don't pay euro contribution, but support the initiative in terms of hours and resources and other forms of contributions. So we're actually quite a big group, 40 plus institutions, mainly from the Netherlands, but also some foreign participants. And the objectives that we formulated for ourselves are to support and promote the acceleration and adaptation of energy efficient housing in the Netherlands. And by definition, looking at the mortgage market, a very important element is the financing thereof. The hub actually came to life following a lot of discussions with Luca and Jennifer and everyone else at the EEMI. We are the local Dutch hub as under the EEMI umbrella. Before we go into what we've done, perhaps it's good to paint a very brief picture of the Dutch property market, the Dutch property stock and how it's composed, because it's in the general perception is that it's very well organized in the Netherlands and that every house has an energy label. However, as I'll show you in a second, that's not the case. We currently have 8.25 million houses in the Netherlands, properties I should say, because it's houses and apartments. And as many of you might know, we're looking to build another million in the next decade. Of the 8.25 currently existing properties, 3 million are in the public rental sector and 5.25 million are privately owned. So that's the residential market and the private buy-to-let market combined. And that's split over 4 million houses and 250,000 properties, apartments, properties. Another way to look at this, at the 5.25 million, is that 2.3 million have an actual energy performance certificate, so a valid energy label. And this is very often the graph that people look at and think, oh, how well is the Netherlands doing? At 30% has an energy label A, but that's only on 40% of the total privately owned property stock. The other 60%, the picture is slightly different. Obviously, these are not actual labels because they don't have a label, the 60%. This is based on estimates by the RVO, based on year of construction, property characteristics, and therefore, by definition, I would say a slight underestimation of the energy efficiency. Because, for example, properties that were built in the 60s would typically have an F or an E label. The gas boilers have probably been replaced by more energy efficient boilers, so they will very often or very likely have moved up a bit. But the key point being is that if we look at this distribution, it's fundamentally different from the one at the 40% that does have a label. So much more work to be done, particularly in the red zone, and way fewer properties that have an energy label A. So, and although the general perception is that most properties have an energy performance certificate in the Netherlands, that's not the case. It's only 40%. And again, most people in Europe tend to think that the Dutch market is very energy efficient. 60% of it is not. And for me, the real wake-up call when I looked at all the RVO data is that of the 5.25 million properties, only 1,600 are Paris-proof. So we only have 1,600 properties in the Netherlands that are A triple plus or A quadruple plus. Sorry, I should say A quadruple plus, and are therefore energy neutral. So for me, that shows the amount of work that needs doing, that remains. But with that in mind, and that knowing all this, when we set up the hub, we started focusing on 3 pillars. And to start with, pillar 3 is representation and alignment. So very much to bring the whole Dutch market together and participate actively in the European initiative. That's what we identified as our 3rd pillar. But the first 2 pillars are developing a framework for the Dutch energy efficient mortgage, and 2, look at the data and disclosure that's required. So particularly these pillar 1 and 2, we've been organizing more than 15 bi-weekly working group meetings, where of our 40 members, most of them have participated every meeting. And we're now very close to launching version 1.0 of the Dutch framework of the energy efficient mortgage. That will very much be based on the substantial contribution only. The do no significant harm analysis is still currently ongoing and will be included in version 1.1 or 2. Once we have the framework, the members and the hub will continue to update it for changes in regulation and for changes in the situation. But this is how we're organized and what we've been doing. And the framework that we are close to announcing will be very much a comply or explain basis, so that everyone in the Netherlands that reports on green mortgages will be able to say, I've adhered fully to the framework, or if in some points they've deviated from the framework, it's just a matter of indicating what other assumptions and criteria have been applied by that institution. Then a few slides on, and I hope most of you know this, but it's useful to set the scene and lay the foundation for the final slides. And to demonstrate EU taxonomy alignment, what we've been doing is look at climate change mitigation and to determine if the technical screening criteria for substantial contribution have been met. This is the work that we've completed, and I'll show you a bit more how we've done that and where we are now. And this is the work on climate change adaptation and the other environmental objectives that will be compiled in the do no significant harm. And in addition, the minimum social safeguards. That's the work that we are recently started some 2 weeks ago. So what I will be talking to you about today is just on the substantial contribution alignment, and that's the climate change mitigation, section 7. And these are the sections that are there, has 7.1, 2, 3 to 6, and 7.7. And again, I won't go through all the nitty-gritty wording because many of you will have seen this wording. But if I were asked to summarize section 7.1, what is substantial contribution? That is if a new build is 10% more energy efficient than the local building regulations require. For section 7.2, again, well, it's not possible in one sentence, but in 2 sentences, either the renovation must meet the conditions of a major renovation or result in a 30% improvement of the energy efficiency of the property. For section 7.3 to 7.6, as most of you will have read, they list quite a few different specific measures on sustainability improvements that need to be done to the underlying property. And in theory, they should be easily classifiable as EU taxonomy aligned. Then on existing properties, there's a breakdown between before December 2020, and apologies, Barry, I still refer to the energy performance certificate class A here. And in the Netherlands, as you've just seen, we have more A labels than the top 15%. So our framework will very much be based on the energy performance certificate, letter A. And for the more recent properties, again, you default to the section 7.1. So just a very brief recap of the actual wording in the section 7. So what have we done? Firstly, we looked at the actual wording, the pages that I've just put on the screen had the white blocks. Do we truly understand what this wording means? Can we apply it to Dutch legislation and practice? For example, we have the Dutch Bauhaus, have the Dutch building regulations. Do we find the definitions that are included in the EU taxonomy? Can we map them and match them to the Dutch Bauhaus? Can we map them to the NTA 8800 methodology, which is our energy performance methodology that's used to determine the EPCs? And very importantly, what are the real life practicalities that we encounter if we try to understand the wording? A very practical example, and a lot of people laugh when I give this example, is how to interpret the word built. If the property was built before 31/12/2020, then A. And if it's after, built after, then it's B. Yeah, but what is built in this sense? The Dutch Bouwbesluit takes the date that a planning permission request is submitted as the built date. And that's obviously a fundamentally different date than a constructor saying, handing in over the keys to a new owner saying, hey, the property is now built. But again, that date is different from the date that the energy performance measurement takes place in the property, which is again the date that's used in the government database. So something that sounds very, very simple, had the word built, basic word in English, already triggered a lot of discussion on the first pillar, how to interpret the EU taxonomy. The second element of, and apologies, so you can then have three different ways of looking at this very strictly. So build, what does it mean? 31/12/2020, net primary energy demand. So a very, very strict interpretation. Energy performance certificate has to be available. Another way of looking at this is, take a slightly broader interpretation. How can we use proxy data? And then it becomes perhaps more difficult to prove on a collateral data for collateral level, and you enter into the risk of into the zone of potentially greenwashing. But still, if otherwise you only have very, very few properties EU taxonomy aligned, it might make sense to apply a slightly broader interpretation. Obviously, where you don't want to end up is in the gray area, where it becomes very complex and where you risk losing transparency and where greenwashing becomes imminent. So we've taken the approach that for the moment, we're taking a very, very strict approach to this column. Only if we can really pinpoint it do we apply it. The second element we looked at, okay, if we know what we mean, do we have data? Do we think there's data available to prove this, to demonstrate the alignment of the economic activity with the substantial contribution criteria? So what data do you need? What are the possible data sources that are available? And can we distinguish between existing and new properties because of 7.7 and 7.1, renovation being two existing properties. But those are some of the key questions we asked ourselves. And the third component that we looked at is, can we then translate the economic activity to the loan that's granted to finance that economic activity? Section 7.7, acquisition and ownership of a property requires a fundamentally different approach in this pillar than a renovation loan under 7.2. So for those of you familiar with the Dutch mortgage market, we have the concept of loan parts. So one mortgage loan can be composed of multiple loan parts. So that's an element that we looked at. Is something loan data or is something sustainability data, and how do we match them? And ultimately, what do we include in the green asset ratio calculation? So this is the approach we've taken, and then, yeah, where are we now? Now that we've at least finished this, had the first part. A lot of green. Dark green is what we think we have a full grasp on and that we truly understand. And the light green boxes are the ones where we've asked a number of questions to the European Commission and where we are waiting some feedback. But in general, yeah, we have a pretty good understanding where we are and where we want to be. But hopefully in the next few weeks, this whole column will be dark green. Unfortunately, and particularly in the space of the renovation area, yeah, we concluded that, yeah, for the existing properties, once we know how to translate things and we know what data is available, and we have a pretty good view on what can be considered substantially contribution aligned. Also for new build, pretty good idea, but we see big challenges in the data, and it's basically confirming what Barry just said. On the renovation side and identifying and mapping and measuring the activities under 7.3 to 7.6. And then the final column, again, on new properties and existing properties, we don't have any problems mapping out what loan is attached to that activity, but particularly in the space of renovation. Yeah, we have quite some work and some challenges to be resolved. So if we then draw a concluding column, yeah, the conclusion at this stage is that for the moment, we will only be able to report substantial contribution alignment on existing properties before 31/12/2020. And as you've seen in one of my first slides, that's only for 40%, or 30% or 40% of the market. So quite a bit of work to be done there. But particularly in the space of renovation, and this is where all the work needs doing, yeah, we really struggle at the moment to demonstrate substantial contribution alignment. And why do I keep on saying substantial contribution alignment? Because we haven't completed, or we've just started to do not significant harm analysis, and that's a whole different ballgame, which will require significantly more data on a fundamentally different level. So our preliminary insight is, as I just said, for the moment we expect only to be able to demonstrate energy performance certificate class A properties, because that's where we understand what we're doing and we have the data. We are waiting for some questions and for some answers on the questions that we posed, and then we think we have a pretty good understanding. Then we need to complete the do no significant harm analysis, but that's still, yeah, a lot is happening in that space still. Many questions we have, and hopefully they will be answered in due course. But particularly obtaining the data on macro level, meso and macro level will be another challenge that we're not used to. But even in the micro level, just to give you an insight, currently we track, and typical Dutch mortgage lenders track 7 property data fields currently. We expect to need another 25 to be able to do the full EU Taxonomy alignment analysis, and another 15 very much to process. And that's something that mortgage lenders are completely not used to. And when I say process, I mean a renovation process. When does it start? When does it end? What has been achieved in between? How do we accommodate the 3-year period that's allowed to realize the energy efficiency improvement to a property? And last but not least, also even to the way things are done now, how we record loans and loan parts in the Netherlands, we expect to need significant changes to be made to that. So we are shifting to data and disclosure. I'll skip through this very quickly, but this is the work that we've literally started just now. What data do we need? That's what we get from work group 1. Where are we going to get it? What are the legal requirements? And what are we allowed to get, yes or no? And what quality does the data need to be for our auditors to be happy? And then only can we start thinking about the operational setup and the governance. Then, Richard, how much time do I have left? On my watch, it says 2 more minutes. So
about that, yes.
Yeah, well, I'll leave the use cases for homework then, because no doubt Luzine will share the presentations. But yeah, this is our big concern, that the way the EU taxonomy is structured now, that we'll be painting green properties dark green, and that the true renovation had the energy label F properties, because only the renovation part can be called EU taxonomy aligned, is that the financial institutions will start to favor getting as many customers to class A because of energy label A, because it's relatively easy to demonstrate. They will start focusing on getting B label properties to A instead of focusing on the true deep renovations that are needed. So that's one of the use cases that we see. And the second is, and that brings me back to the 1 million new properties being built in the Netherlands. Yeah, if we just follow the EU taxonomy target of 10% better, all these properties will need to be refitted within the next 10 years to be Paris proof. So to save the world, we need to be much more ambitious than just EU taxonomy alignment, applying that to new builds. And that, Richard, brings me to the end, and I'll put the conclusions on here. But yeah, I think I've basically made those already. We've made significant progress in the year we've gone, that's spent. Yeah, a lot of interpretation, but too strict will limit the amount of green financing available. And we've learned so much on energy efficiency as the financial sector, that we're now getting to the point where developing some new solutions and new products to support our clients. But that, yeah, it had the shortfalls of the EU taxonomy. Yeah, we would welcome a discussion on discussing those very quickly and not waiting for the 3-year, 4-year revision period comes up.
Thank you, Piet Hein. The devil is in the detail in this, and I'm in awe of the diligence with which you've gone through this process. And I wonder when people write these taxonomies, when they realise the implications and the different national implications. What I'd love to know, and I'm not asking you this, I'm asking the audience this, is how many other countries are going through a similar process to try to understand this, and if not, the extent to which they can borrow your work. Yeah, but one question, I almost run out of time, but I've got one real question, which is, you clearly do your homework here. Who's marking your homework? Are you presenting this to Commission? Is it your individual bank's auditors? Is it your national regulators?
Well, A and B. We're not talking to the regulators, so it's very much we're working with all our members together, and they all put their experience and knowledge to the table. So it's a combination of, and we keep each other sharp, as we say in Dutch.
Mm-hmm.
And that has resulted in us submitting our first 15 questions to the European Commission. Diana, who presented on the last Bauhaus meeting, we've had several calls with her now, and we're literally asking for confirmation. Have we interpreted this correctly? And then, as you've seen on the data and disclosure slide, the auditors part is literally where one of the next points that we're starting to look at. That's the data quality assurance. If we know what we're doing and we know what data we need, what quality data and what quality does that data need to be of? And that's going to be a very interesting question, Richard, if the conclusion is whether or not the data is of a sufficiently high quality. Mm. And I have my concerns there.
Yeah. Well, like I say, I'm in awe of the process and the diligence with which you're going about it. And I think 26 other EU countries are going to be plagiarising a lot of your work. I should say, if you are in those other countries, that all of these slides from Piet Hein and from all of the other presentations will be available on the website within a couple of days, as will a recording of this presentation. So Piet Hein, Mira, Barry and Patrick, thank you all so much for your contributions today. I'm going to hand back to Luca with absolutely no time left over, with the warning, Luca, that you are the only thing standing in between these good people and their weekends.
Well, just wanted to wish a good weekend. Thank you all the speakers for navigating these uncharted waters. We are all doing a difficult job trying to understand and learn from each other. I would like to thank also you, Richard, for guiding us in this kind of a journey, and Lucine, who is doing an excellent work helping us to have the Bauhaus always ready for you. We invite you to the next Bauhaus. It will be the last Monday of May, the 30th. We have very nice topics lining up now, and but we will keep this as a surprise for the end of the month. We will follow up with emails confirming the topics. I wish you a fantastic weekend, and I am looking forward to seeing you next time, hopefully in person. Cheers.